The sky bled crimson as the distant echoes of gunfire pierced the evening calm, sending Lina Jacy scrambling up the rocky incline of Martin's Ridge, her breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. Behind her, the pursuing band of bounty hunters crashed through the brush, their voices carrying promises of violence that made her blood run cold. Texas, 1876. The territory was unforgiving to everyone, but especially to an Apache woman traveling alone through lands that once belonged to her people. Lina had been moving for 3 days straight, desperate to reach her kin, who had established an uneasy peace with the settlers near the Mexican border. She hadn't asked for trouble, but trouble had found her anyway when she stopped to drink at a creek where 3 men were camping. They'd recognized her instantly as Apache from her clothing and features, and in these parts, that was enough to brand her an enemy. One of them had claimed there was a bounty for any savage caught trespassing on white settled lands. It was a lie, there was no such official bounty, but it was excuse enough for men looking to harm a lone woman. The bullet that whistled past her ear told Lina they were gaining ground. Her legs burned with exhaustion, her throat parched to the point of agony. The mesa ahead offered her only chance of escape, but she knew she wouldn't make it there before they caught her. "I see her, up on the ridge," one of the men shouted, his voice carrying in the still evening air. Lina ducked behind a boulder, pressing her back against the cool stone. She had no weapon save for a small knife, nothing that would help against 3 armed men. Closing her eyes, she whispered a prayer to the spirits of her ancestors, asking for guidance or, failing that, a swift passage to the next world. The sound of hoofbeats approaching from the west made her eyes snap open. Another threat, or perhaps salvation. She peered cautiously around the edge of the boulder. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the setting sun. He rode with the easy confidence of a man who belonged to these lands, sitting tall in the saddle of a magnificent chestnut quarter horse. As he drew closer, Lina could make out his features, a strong jawline covered in several days' worth of stubble, piercing blue eyes beneath the wide brim of his Stetson, and the sun-bronzed skin of a man who lived his life outdoors. The rider pulled his horse to a stop when he spotted the 3 men climbing the ridge. His hand moved casually to rest on the revolver at his hip. "Evening, gentlemen," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance. Seemed to be in quite a hurry. The 3 men froze, clearly not expecting company. The tallest of them, a man with a pockmarked face and yellowing teeth, stepped forward. "Not your business, cowboy. We're hunting an Apache thief. Stole from our camp." Lina's grip tightened on her knife. The accusation was as false as it was dangerous. The rider's eyes narrowed slightly, and he shifted in his saddle. That right must have been something mighty valuable to chase someone up this ridge at sundown. "Like I said, not your concern." The pockmarked man's hand inched toward his holster. The cowboy noticed the movement and smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Well now, I've made it my concern. This is Dawson Ranch property, and I don't recall giving anyone permission to hunt on it, game or people." Lina's heart pounded in her chest. This stranger was either going to save her life or get himself killed trying. She couldn't decide whether to make herself known or remain hidden. The decision was made for her when one of the other men spotted her. There she is, behind that rock, 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her hiding spot. Lina stood, knife in hand, her chin raised in defiance even as fear coursed through her veins. The cowboy's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes when he saw her recognition, not of her specifically, but of her situation. "That's the thief?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Apache trash," spat the 3rd man, a wiry fellow with a scar running down one cheek. Probably scouting for a war party. The cowboy's gaze met Lina's for a brief moment, and in that exchange, she saw something unexpected: respect and a silent question. She gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head, denying their accusations. "Well," the cowboy said, dismounting with fluid grace, "seems we have a disagreement here. The way I see it, you boys are trespassing, and this lady doesn't look to be carrying much that could have been stolen." "Lady?" The pockmarked man laughed. "That's rich. She's just a—" "Choose your next words carefully," the cowboy interrupted, his hand still resting on his holster. "I've got a particular dislike for men who hunt women, regardless of their heritage." The tension in the air was palpable. Lina knew these men wouldn't back down easily, not when their pride was at stake. The cowboy must have known it too, because he subtly shifted his stance, preparing for what might come next. "Who the hell are you to tell us what to do?" demanded the pockmarked man. "Name's Dawson. Dominic Rawlins. This is my family's land you're standing on." He gestured broadly with his free hand. "And I'm telling you to turn around and ride out the way you came in." The name seemed to give the men pause. Even in these parts, the Rawlins name carried weight. Rawlins. From the double D. Asked the wiry man, suddenly less certain. Dominic nodded once, his eyes never leaving the three men. "The very same. Now I won't ask again." A tense silence followed as the bounty hunters exchanged glances, calculating their odds. Finally, the pockmarked man spat on the ground. "Fine. Ain't worth the trouble. But you remember this, Rawlins, that Apache brings trouble. Don't come crying when your cattle start disappearing." Dominic's expression remained impassive. "I'll take my chances." The men backed away slowly, clearly reluctant to turn their backs on Dominic. When they finally did retreat down the ridge, Dominic waited until they were a good distance away before approaching Lina. "They'll be back," he said matter-of-factly, stopping a respectful distance from her. "And next time, they might bring friends." Lina lowered her knife slightly but remained wary. "Why did you help me?" Dominic shrugged, removing his hat to run a hand through his dark hair. "Seemed like the right thing to do. 3 against 1 ain't fair odds, especially when the one is clearly exhausted and outgunned." His assessment was accurate. Lina had been traveling for days with minimal rest and food. The knife in her hand felt heavy, and she doubted she could have used it effectively in her current state. "Where are you headed?" Dominic asked, replacing his hat. Lina hesitated before answering. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, but this man had just risked his life for her. "South. To the border. My mother's sister and her family have permission to camp near Marfa." Dominic nodded, familiar with the small but growing settlement. "That's another 3 days' journey at least." "Those men will be watching the main trails." "I know these lands," Lina said with quiet dignity. "I can find my way." "I don't doubt it," Dominic replied, and there was genuine respect in his voice. "But you're in no condition to outrun them if they catch your trail again." He was right, though Lina was reluctant to admit it. She had pushed herself to the limits of her endurance, and the confrontation had drained what little energy she had left. Dominic seemed to sense her internal struggle. He turned and walked back to his horse, a beautiful chestnut quarter horse with a white blaze down its face. The animal watched her with intelligent eyes, ears pricked forward with curiosity. "This is Copper," Dominic said, patting the horse's neck. "Fastest horse in the county and smart enough to find his way home in a dust storm." Lina didn't understand why he was telling her this until he continued. "He'll get you to Marfa if you let him. Just keep heading south and follow the stars. He knows to avoid the main trails after dark." Lina stared at him in disbelief. "You're giving me your horse." Dominic adjusted the stirrups, lowering them to accommodate her shorter height. "Lending," he corrected with a hint of a smile, "though I reckon it might be a while before I see him again." Why would you do this?" Lina asked, suspicion warring with desperate hope. Dominic's expression grew serious. "Because those men will be back, and next time they might not be so easily discouraged. I can handle myself on foot, but you need the speed Copper can provide." He held out the reins to her. "Take him. Get to your family in Marfa." Lina hesitated, her fingers tightening around her knife. "And what do you want in return?" The question seemed to surprise Dominic. "Nothing. Just get yourself to safety." It was such an unexpected answer that Lina found herself speechless. In her experience, white men never gave without expecting something in return, usually something she wasn't willing to give. "I don't understand," she finally said. Dominic sighed, his gaze drifting to the darkening horizon where the bounty hunters had disappeared. "My mother was half Comanche," he said quietly. "She told me stories about how her people were hunted, how she had to hide who she was to survive. I promised her I'd never stand by and watch someone suffer if I could help." The confession startled Lina. Looking more closely at him, she could see the subtle hints of native heritage in his cheekbones and the set of his eyes, easily overlooked if one wasn't looking for them. "Those men," Dominic continued, "they're not just after you because you're Apache. They're the kind who enjoy having power over others. I've seen their type before." Lina knew he was right. She had recognized the look in their eyes, not just hatred, but a cruel anticipation that made her skin crawl. With a deep breath, she sheathed her knife and stepped forward to take the reins. "Thank you," she said softly. "I will remember this." Dominic helped her mount, adjusting the stirrups one final time. "Follow the ridge south until you hit Willow Creek, then stay along the water. It'll lead you to safer paths." Lina nodded, gathering the reins in her hands. The horse shifted beneath her, eager to move. "What about you?" she asked. Dominic patted Copper's flank. "I'll be fine. Ranch is about 5 miles east of here. I'll make it before midnight." Lina wasn't convinced, but she knew every minute of daylight was precious. "May your ancestors watch over you, Dominic Rawlins," she said in the formal way of her people. "And yours over you, miss." He looked up at her questioningly. "Lina." "Lina Jacy," she replied. "Safe journey, Lina Jacy," Dominic said, stepping back from the horse. With a final nod of gratitude, Lina urged Copper forward, heading south along the ridge as Dominic had instructed. When she glanced back, he was still standing there, watching to ensure her safe departure, a solitary figure against the darkening sky. As the night enveloped her, Lina whispered a prayer for the strange cowboy who had given her a chance at survival, never expecting to see him again. The horse beneath her moved with confident sureness, carrying her away from danger and toward an uncertain future. Dominic watched until Lina and Copper disappeared into the gathering darkness, then turned east toward home. The ranch was closer to 7 miles than 5, but he hadn't wanted to worry her. He walked with purpose, his senses alert for any sign of the bounty hunters returning. The night air grew cold quickly, a reminder that autumn was approaching. Dominic pulled his coat tighter around himself, his thoughts returning to the Apache woman. There had been something in her eyes, not just fear or gratitude, but a fierce determination that had stirred something within him. He hoped she would make it safely to Marfa. The journey back to the ranch took longer than anticipated. Without Copper, Dominic had to navigate carefully in the darkness, avoiding the steep ravines that cut through Rawlins' land. It was well past midnight when he finally spotted the warm glow of lanterns from the main house. As he approached, he could make out a figure on the porch, his younger brother, Lucas, rifle in hand as he kept watch. "Dom," Lucas called out, standing as he recognized his brother's familiar gait. "Where the hell have you been? And where's Copper?" Dominic climbed the porch steps wearily, clapping a hand on his brother's shoulder. "It's a long story. Is father awake?" Lucas shook his head. Went to bed cursing your name about 2 hours ago. Said to tell you the north pasture fence still needs mending, with or without you. Sounds about right, Dominic said with a wry smile. I'll explain everything in the morning. Right now, I need water and sleep in that order. Lucas followed him inside, clearly bursting with questions but respecting his brother's exhaustion enough to hold them until morning. Dominic was grateful for the reprieve. He wasn't sure how to explain his decision to give copper to an Apache woman he'd just met, especially to his father who, despite being married to a half-Comanche woman, still held complicated views about the indigenous peoples of the territory. Morning came too quickly. Dominic awoke to the sound of his father's voice booming through the house, demanding to know where his eldest son and their best horse had disappeared to. With a resigned sigh, Dominic pulled on his boots and went to face the music. Dominic Rawlins was an imposing figure even at 62. Standing 6'3" with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes that matched his son's, he had built the Double D from nothing after moving west following the Civil War. He loved his sons fiercely, but demanded as much from them as he did from himself. There he is, Frederick said as Dominic entered the kitchen. Care to explain why Lucas tells me you walked home last night without copper? Dominic poured himself a cup of coffee before responding. I gave him to someone who needed him more than I did at the moment. Frederick's bushy eyebrows shot up. Gave. My best breeding stallion loaned, Dominic clarified, taking a careful sip of the scalding coffee. And he'll come back. Copper always does. To who? Frederick demanded. And why? Dominic set down his cup. An Apache woman being hunted by 3 men on our land. She was trying to reach family in Marfa. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Lucas, who had been quietly eating at the table, looked up with wide eyes, while their cook, Maria, crossed herself quietly before returning to her biscuit making. Frederick's expression was unreadable. You gave our best horse to an Apache stranger. I did, Dominic replied evenly. Those men were going to kill her or worse. They were trespassing on our land to do it. I stopped them, but they'll be back. She needed to get away fast. Frederick rubbed his chin thoughtfully. These men recognize any of them. Dominic shook his head. Strangers. One had a pockmarked face, another a scar down his cheek. Bounty hunters, most like, Frederick murmured. Been reports of them causing trouble south of here. Claiming authority they don't have. Dominic was surprised by his father's response. He had expected anger, not this thoughtful consideration. You're not mad about copper? He asked cautiously. Frederick fixed him with a stern look. Oh, I'm plenty mad about copper. That horse cost me $200 and 3 months of negotiations with old man Pritchard. But, he sighed heavily, his gaze drifting to the portrait of Dominic's mother that hung on the wall. Your mother would have done the same thing. Never could turn away someone in need, especially one of her own people. Dominic felt a wave of relief, followed quickly by a pang of guilt. I'm sorry I didn't ask first. You're a grown man, Dominic, 30 years old and still acting on impulse. Frederick shook his head, but there was a grudging pride in his voice. Just like your mother, always leading with your heart. Lucas, who had been listening intently, finally spoke up. Do you think she'll make it to Marfa? Dominic thought of Lina's determined expression, the way she had handled copper with natural ease. Yes, he said confidently. I think she will. Frederick nodded decisively. Well, copper or no copper, that fence in the north pasture won't fix itself. And I want you boys to keep an eye out for those bounty hunters. If they're bold enough to pursue someone onto our land, they might come back looking for trouble. As Dominic headed out to work, his thoughts kept returning to Lina. Had she made it safely through the night? Would copper truly bring her all the way to Marfa? And why couldn't he shake the memory of her eyes, dark and fierce and proud, even in the face of danger? Little did he know that those questions would be answered sooner than he expected. 3 weeks passed with no sign of Copper or the bounty hunters. Dominic had begun to worry that something had happened to both, though he kept these concerns to himself. His father had seemingly accepted the loss of their prized stallion, but Dominic caught him scanning the horizon more often than usual when they rode the property lines. The ranch kept them busy. Cattle needed moving to winter pastures. Fences required constant maintenance, and there was always the threat of rustlers to consider. The work was hard but satisfying, and it left little time for Dominic to dwell on the fate of the Apache woman he had helped. Until the day she appeared at their gate. Dominic was returning from checking the southern fence line when he spotted a figure walking slowly up the main road toward the ranch house. Something about the determined gait struck him as familiar. As he drew closer, his heart skipped a beat when he recognized Lina Jacy. She was on foot, dressed in simple but clean clothing that looked to be a mixture of traditional Apache and settler styles. A pack was slung over her shoulder, and she walked with the steady pace of someone who had been traveling a long distance. Dominic spurred his horse forward, closing the distance between them quickly. Lina stopped when she saw him approaching, her expression guarded but resolute. "Lina Jacy," he said as he reined in his horse beside her. "You're a long way from Marfa." "Dominic Rawlins," she replied, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "You remembered my name." "Not every day I give my best horse to a stranger," he said, returning her smile. Then more seriously, "Are you all right? Where's Copper?" "Your horse is safe," she assured him. "I left him with my family in Marfa. He brought me there just as you said he would." She hesitated, then added, "I have come to repay my debt to you." Dominic dismounted, standing before her on the dusty road. Up close, he could see changes in her since their last meeting. Though still wary, the desperate fear was gone from her eyes. She stood taller, more confident, her skin glowing with health rather than the pallor of exhaustion he remembered. "There's no debt," he said. "I'm just glad you made it safely." Lina shook her head firmly. "In my culture, we do not leave debts unpaid. You saved my life and gave me your most valuable possession to ensure my safety. I have come to work for you until my debt is settled." Dominic blinked in surprise. "Work for me? That's not necessary. Copper will find his way back eventually." "I did not come alone," Lina said, a determined set to her jaw. "I brought others who wish to repay this debt as well. My aunt's husband and my 2 cousins. They are skilled with horses and cattle. They await my word at the camp by the creek." Dominic was taken aback by this development. "You brought your family to work on our ranch for 1 season," Lina clarified. "Until the debt is repaid. They are good workers and they will cause no trouble." Dominic ran a hand through his hair, considering her proposal. The ranch could certainly use extra hands, especially skilled ones with winter approaching. But he couldn't make this decision alone. "You'll need to speak with my father," he said finally. "It's his ranch ultimately." Lina nodded, accepting this condition. "Will you take me to him?" Dominic gestured to his horse. "Climb up. The ranch house is still a mile away." After a moment's hesitation, Lina allowed him to help her mount behind him. As they rode, Dominic became acutely aware of her presence, the light pressure of her hands at his waist, the subtle scent of sage that seemed to cling to her hair. It was disconcerting how conscious he was of her, this woman he had met only once before. "Why did you really come back?" he asked over his shoulder. "You could have simply sent Copper home with one of your relatives." There was a long pause before she answered. "I told you, to repay my debt." "Most people would consider their debt paid by returning the horse," Dominic pointed out. "You walked all the way from Marfa, bringing your family to work for free. That's more than repayment." Lina's voice was quiet when she finally responded. "Perhaps I had other reasons as well." Before Dominic could ask what those reasons might be, they arrived at the ranch house. Frederick Rawlins was on the porch, reviewing ledgers with Lucas. Both men looked up as Dominic approached with his unexpected passenger. "Father," Dominic called out as he helped Lina dismount. "We have a visitor." Frederick set aside his papers, studying Lina with undisguised curiosity. "So I see. This wouldn't happen to be the Apache woman Copper is currently keeping company with, would it?" Dominic nodded. "This is Lina Jacy. She's come a long way to speak with you." To Dominic's surprise, his father descended the porch steps and extended his hand to Lina in greeting. "Welcome to the Double D, Miss Jacy. I've been wondering when we might meet." Lina shook his hand with quiet dignity. "Thank you for receiving me, Mr. Rawlins. Your son did me a great service and I have come to repay it." Frederick invited her onto the porch, offering her water and a seat at the table. Dominic watched in amazement as his usually gruff father treated Lina with unexpected courtesy, listening attentively as she explained her proposal to bring her relatives to work on the ranch. "So," Frederick said when she had finished, "you've walked all the way from Marfa to offer me 4 workers for the price of 1 horse." "For the price of my life," Lina corrected gently, "which your son saved." Frederick's weathered face softened slightly. "He mentioned that, yes." He glanced at Dominic, then back to Lina. "Tell me about these relatives of yours. What skills do they bring?" "My uncle Joseph worked with horses for the cavalry before returning to our people. My cousins Thomas and William have been working cattle for ranches near Marfa for 3 seasons. They speak English well and understand your ways." Frederick nodded thoughtfully. "We could use the help, especially with skilled hands." He stroked his beard, considering. "Where would they stay?" "They can build their own shelter," Lina said promptly. "We would require only the space to do so." "And you?" Frederick asked. "What skills do you bring to the Double D?" Lina met his gaze steadily. "I can cook, clean, mend, and garden. I know the medicinal properties of plants in this region. I can help your housewoman." Maria, who had been eavesdropping from the kitchen doorway, made a sound of approval at this. Frederick seemed to come to a decision. "Very well. You and your family may work here until spring. We'll provide fair meals and the materials for your shelter. If things go well, we can discuss a more permanent arrangement then." Dominic couldn't hide his surprise at his father's ready acceptance. Frederick caught his expression and chuckled. "What? You think I'd turn away good workers when we're short-handed?" "Besides," he added with a significant look at his son, "I'm curious about the woman who inspired my sensible eldest son to give away his best horse." Lina thanked Frederick formally, then stood to leave. "I will bring my family tomorrow at dawn if that is acceptable." "It is," Frederick confirmed. "Dominic will show you where you can set up your camp." As Dominic walked Lina back toward the main gate, a strange mixture of emotions coursed through him. He was glad she had returned safely, but unsettled by the way his pulse quickened in her presence. He was 30 years old, too experienced to be affected this way by a woman he barely knew. "Your father is not what I expected," Lina said as they walked. Dominic smiled. "He surprises most people. Looks like a grizzly bear, can drive a harder bargain than any banker in Texas, but has a soft spot for lost causes." "Is that what I am, a lost cause?" There was a hint of challenge in her voice. "No," Dominic replied seriously. "I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met." Lina glanced at him, clearly not expecting such a direct compliment. For a brief moment her composure slipped, revealing something vulnerable beneath her controlled exterior. "You did not have to say that," she murmured. "I only say what I mean," Dominic responded. They had reached the gate. Beyond it, the road stretched away toward the creek where Lina's family presumably waited for her signal. "I will return at dawn," Lina said, adjusting the pack on her shoulder. Dominic nodded. "I'll be waiting." As she turned to go, he added, "Lina, I'm glad you came back." She paused, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. "As am I, Dominic Rawlins." He watched her walk away, a solitary figure against the vast landscape, and felt a certainty settle over him. His life had just changed in ways he couldn't yet understand. True to her word, Lina arrived at dawn the next day with her relatives in tow. Joseph Jacy was a dignified man in his 50s with silver streaking his dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. His sons, Thomas and William, were in their 20s, strong and capable-looking, with the easy confidence of men comfortable with hard work. Frederick welcomed them formally, laying out his expectations and the boundaries of the ranch. Dominic was impressed by his father's respectful tone. There was no condescension in his manner, only the straightforward discussion of one landowner with valued workers. "Dominic will show you where to set up your camp," Frederick concluded. "The creek there has good water year-round, and there's plenty of stone and timber for building. Once you're settled, come to the barn. We've got cattle to move before the first frost." Joseph nodded his thanks. "We will build quickly and be ready to work by midday." As Dominic led them to the spot near the creek that his father had designated, he found himself walking alongside Lina, who had been quiet throughout the introduction. "Your family seems capable," he observed. "They are," she agreed. "They were not sure about coming at first. There is history between our peoples." "I know," Dominic acknowledged soberly, "but they came anyway." Lina glanced at him. "They came because I asked it of them, and because I told them you were different from other white men they had encountered." The simple statement carried a weight that Dominic felt in his chest. "I hope I prove worthy of that assessment." For the first time, he saw a genuine smile cross Lina's face, transforming her serious features into something that made his breath catch. "You already have, Dominic Rawlins. That is why I am here." The Apache family settled in quickly, constructing a sturdy shelter near the creek that impressed even Frederick with its efficient design. Joseph and his sons proved to be exceptional workers, their knowledge of horses and cattle evident in everything they did. They kept to themselves during off hours, but worked seamlessly with the other ranch hands during the day. Lina divided her time between helping Maria in the main house and tending to her family's needs. She moved through the ranch with quiet grace, observing everything but saying little. Dominic found himself creating excuses to be in the main house during her working hours, drawn to her presence in ways he couldn't explain even to himself. 2 weeks after their arrival, an unexpected autumn storm hit the ranch. Rain pounded the buildings, and wind howled through the valleys, sending the cattle seeking shelter in the low groves of trees. Dominic and Lucas, along with several hands including Thomas and William, had been out checking the herd when the storm struck. They returned drenched and chilled to the bone, mud caked on their boots and clothes. Lina was in the kitchen with Maria, preparing a stew for dinner. When she saw the condition of the men, she immediately set about boiling more water and preparing hot drinks infused with herbs she had gathered earlier that week. "Drink this," she instructed, handing a steaming mug to Dominic. "It will warm you and prevent the coughing sickness." The liquid was bitter but not unpleasant, with hints of something like mint and honey. Dominic drank it gratefully, feeling warmth spread through his limbs almost immediately. "What is this?" he asked, cradling the mug in his cold hands. "An old remedy," Lina replied, moving on to serve the others. "My grandmother taught me." Frederick, who had been watching from the doorway, accepted his own mug with a thoughtful expression. Your grandmother was wise in the ways of medicine, Lina nodded. She was a healer among our people. She taught me much before she passed to the spirit world. Healing skills are valuable on a ranch, Frederick remarked. Men and animals are always getting themselves hurt out here. It was the closest he had come to acknowledging that the Apache family's presence might extend beyond their original agreement. Dominic caught the subtle shift in his father's tone and hid a smile behind his mug. As the weeks passed, the dynamics on the ranch began to change. The initial wariness between the Jacys and the other ranch hands gave way to grudging respect, then to genuine camaraderie. Joseph's knowledge of horses proved invaluable when one of their prized mares had a difficult foaling, and Thomas's skill with tracking helped recover a dozen cattle that had wandered during a foggy night. Lina's position evolved as well. What had begun as basic household help transformed as her knowledge of medicinal plants and healing techniques became apparent. After she successfully treated a ranch hand's infected wound that had resisted Maria's traditional remedies, word of her skills spread quickly. Soon, people from neighboring ranches were finding reasons to visit the Double D when they had ailments needing attention. Frederick, never one to miss an opportunity, set up a small room off the kitchen where Lina could tend to those seeking her help. He asked only that any payment offered be split fairly between her and the ranch, an arrangement Lina accepted with dignity. Through it all, Dominic found himself increasingly drawn to her. He admired her quiet strength, her unwavering dedication to her family, and the gentle authority with which she practiced her healing arts. They began to seek each other's company in small ways, a shared cup of coffee at dawn before the day's work began, a few minutes of conversation as twilight settled over the ranch. It was during one such evening, nearly 2 months after the Jacys' arrival, that Dominic finally acknowledged to himself what he had been feeling. They were walking along the creek, ostensibly so Lina could gather certain plants that only showed themselves at dusk. "Winter will come soon," Lina observed, kneeling to carefully harvest a small flowering herb. "The signs are all around us." "Will you return to Marfa when spring comes?" Dominic asked, the question that had been weighing on him for weeks finally finding voice. Lina's hand stilled on the plant. "That was our agreement with your father." "Agreements can change," Dominic said carefully. "You and your family have become valuable to the ranch. Father would never admit it, but he'd be sorry to see you go." Lina looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting the fading light. "And you, Dominic Rawlins, would you be sorry?" The directness of her question caught him off guard, but he answered with equal honesty. "Yes, more than I have words to express." Something shifted in her expression, a softening around her eyes. She stood, placing the gathered herbs in her basket. "Why?" Dominic took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Because when you're here, the ranch feels more like home than it ever has. Because you see things others miss. Because—" He hesitated, then decided to risk the full truth. "Because I find myself thinking about you when you're not near, and when you are, I can't seem to think of anything else." Lina stood very still, her gaze never leaving his face as if searching for any sign of insincerity. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because the guarded expression she typically maintained in his presence melted away. "I did not return only to repay a debt," she admitted softly. "I could have sent copper back with my cousins. I came because I wanted to know the man who would give his prized horse to an Apache woman he had just met, expecting nothing in return." Dominic moved closer, emboldened by her confession. "And have you found what you wanted to know?" Lina nodded, a smile touching her lips. "I have found a man unlike any I have known, a man of honor who sees beyond the color of skin or the language of birth." "Lina," Dominic said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't want you to leave when spring comes." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken possibilities. Around them, the creek murmured its endless song, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the emerging stars. "Among my people," Lina finally said, "a man who wishes a woman to stay would speak with her family." It was a gentle reminder of her traditions, but also an invitation. Dominic recognized it for what it was: not a rejection, but a path forward. "Then I will speak with Joseph," he said solemnly. "If you think he might listen." Lina's smile widened. "He has watched you these past months, as have I. He sees how you treat your workers, how you respect the land, how you honor your word. He will listen." Dominic reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and took her hand in his. Her fingers were small but strong, calloused from work but still somehow soft. The connection between them was like a current of electricity, immediate and undeniable. "I never expected to find you," he said quietly, "but now I can't imagine my life without you in it." Lina's fingers tightened around his. "Nor I without you." They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, both aware that they were crossing a threshold from which there was no return. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be those who disapproved, who wouldn't understand the connection between a ranch owner's son and an Apache healer. But in that moment, under the vast Texas sky with the first stars appearing overhead, such concerns seemed distant and inconsequential. What mattered was the woman beside him, who had walked back into his life of her own accord, bringing with her a future he had never dared to imagine. Winter descended on the Double D Ranch with unexpected ferocity. Snow blanketed the land earlier than anyone could remember, and temperatures plummeted to levels that tested both man and beast. The cattle huddled in the sheltered valleys, their breath creating clouds of vapor in the frigid air. Horses stamped restlessly in their stalls, eager for exercise but confined by the treacherous conditions. Inside the ranch house, life adjusted to the rhythm of the season. Work continued, but of a different sort: mending tack, repairing tools, planning for spring planting. The Jacy family had winterized their shelter with additional layers of hides and insulation, creating a surprisingly warm haven against the elements. Dominic had spoken with Joseph as promised, formally expressing his intention to court Lina according to Apache traditions. The older man had listened gravely, asking pointed questions about Dominic's expectations and intentions. It had been a challenging conversation, one that forced Dominic to examine his own heart more deeply than he ever had before. "My daughter has suffered much," Joseph had said. "Her husband was killed by soldiers when she was barely 20. She has walked a lonely path since then." This revelation had stunned Dominic. Lina had never mentioned a husband, and he had not thought to ask about her past. The knowledge that she had already experienced such profound loss gave him a new understanding of her reserved nature and fierce independence. "I did not know," he had replied honestly. "She has not spoken of it." Joseph had nodded. "She does not speak of many things that live in her heart. This is her way, but if you wish to walk beside her, you must understand that she carries these memories always." "I would never ask her to forget," Dominic had assured him, "only to allow me to share whatever burden she carries from now forward." Joseph had studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "Among our people, courtship is not entered into lightly. It is a time of learning, of showing respect not just for the woman but for her family and traditions." "I am willing to learn," Dominic had said, "and to honor your ways." In the end, Joseph had given his blessing with the understanding that the courtship would follow Apache customs. This meant formal visits, always chaperoned, and a series of symbolic gifts that demonstrated Dominic's ability to provide for Lina. It was a far cry from the casual courtships Dominic had known in his younger days, but he found himself appreciating the deliberate pace and the emphasis on respect. Each conversation with Lina, each small token exchanged, felt significant in ways his previous relationships never had. Frederick had been surprisingly supportive when Dominic informed him of his intentions. "Can't say I'm shocked," he had said gruffly. "Been watching you moon over that girl since she arrived. Your mother would approve, I think. She always hoped you boys would find women with spirit." The rest of the ranch adjusted to the developing relationship with varying degrees of acceptance. Maria crossed herself and muttered prayers whenever Dominic and Lina sat together in the kitchen, but she also began teaching Lina her special recipes, a sure sign of approval. Lucas teased his brother mercilessly, but treated Lina with the same easy respect he showed to all women. The ranch hands followed their employer's lead, accepting the situation without comment. Not everyone was so accommodating, however. When word spread to neighboring ranches that Dominic Rawlins was courting an Apache woman, the reactions ranged from disbelief to outright hostility. Invitations to social gatherings became less frequent, and certain families who had once been eager to introduce their daughters to the eligible Rawlins heir suddenly found reasons to avoid the Double D altogether. Dominic had expected some resistance, but was surprised by the intensity of the prejudice displayed by people he had known his entire life. It gave him a small glimpse into the world Lina had always inhabited, where judgment based on heritage was a daily reality. One snowy evening in early December, as Dominic escorted Lina back to her family's shelter after she had spent the day tending to a ranch hand with a broken leg, they encountered Elijah Barton, the owner of the neighboring Triple B Ranch, riding onto Rawlins' property. Barton was a hard man with a reputation for fair dealing in business but intolerance in personal matters. He reined in his horse when he spotted them, his expression darkening as he took in their proximity to one another and their linked hands. "Evening, Dominic," he said, pointedly ignoring Lina. "Your father around. Got business to discuss." "He's in the house," Dominic replied evenly, feeling Lina tense beside him. "I'm sure he'll be happy to see you." Barton's gaze flickered dismissively over Lina before returning to Dominic. "Heard some strange rumors in town. Thought I'd come see for myself if they were true." His tone made it clear that he had found his answer. Dominic felt a surge of protective anger. "If you have something to say, Barton, say it directly." The older man's mouth tightened. "Just concerned for an old friend's family is all." Frederick might not see what's happening under his nose, but others do. Apache woman suddenly appears, worms her way in with tales of medicine and healing. Next thing you know, the heir to the Double D is forgetting his own kind. He spat into the snow. "Seen it before. Never ends well." Lina's grip on Dominic's hand tightened, a silent warning against losing his temper. It was a testament to her strength that she stood tall under Barton's contemptuous gaze, her expression betraying none of the hurt his words must have caused. "Mr. Barton," Dominic said with forced calm, "I respect your right to your opinion, wrong though it may be. But this is Rawlins' land, and on Rawlins' land, all guests are treated with courtesy. That includes Miss Jacy and her family." Barton's face flushed with anger. "Your father built this ranch to pass down to his sons, to see his legacy thrown away on some Indian. That's enough." The sharp command came from behind them. Frederick Rawlins stood on the porch, his expression thunderous. "You forget yourself, Elijah, and you forget whose land you're on." Barton shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Fred, I'm just trying to talk some sense into the boy. You can't possibly approve of this arrangement." Frederick descended the porch steps, moving to stand beside his son and Lina. My approval or disapproval is not your concern. But since you seem so interested, I'll tell you that Dominic has my full support in his choice of companion." The unequivocal statement startled not only Barton but Dominic as well. His father had been accepting of his interest in Lina, yes, but this public declaration of support was unexpected. "You'll regret this," Barton warned. "The community won't stand for it. You'll lose business, lose standing." Frederick laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Elijah, I've known you 30 years, and in all that time you've never once correctly predicted what this community would or wouldn't stand for. They said the same thing when I married a half-Comanche woman, remember? Said I'd be ruined." He gestured expansively at the prosperous ranch around them. "Somehow we managed." Barton's expression soured further. "This is different. That Apache woman has a name," Frederick interrupted. "Miss Jacy has earned her place here through hard work and skill, more than I can say for some who were born to privilege." The rebuke was clear. Barton straightened in his saddle, his pride wounded. "I see you've made up your mind. Don't say I didn't warn you." He wheeled his horse around. "We'll discuss that business another time." As Barton rode away, Frederick turned to Dominic and Lina with a weary sigh. "Well, that'll be all over the county by tomorrow." "I'm sorry, Father," Dominic began, but Frederick waved him off. "Don't be. Barton's been a self-righteous jackass since we were boys together. His opinion means less than nothing to me." He regarded Lina with kindly eyes. "Are you all right, Miss Jacy? Elijah's tongue has always been sharper than his wits." Lina inclined her head respectfully. "I am well, Mr. Rawlins. Such words are not new to me." Frederick nodded soberly. "No, I expect they're not. Still, you shouldn't have to hear them on my land." He turned his gaze to the darkening sky. "Storm's picking up. Best get you back to your family before the trail becomes impassable. Dominic, see Miss Jacy safely home, then come back for supper. Maria's made her special venison stew." As Frederick returned to the house, Dominic turned to Lina. "I'm sorry about Barton." Lina's expression was philosophical. "There will always be men like him. What matters is that there are also men like your father. And you." They continued toward her family's shelter, walking close together against the biting wind. The encounter with Barton had brought into sharp focus the challenges they would face if they continued on this path together. Yet somehow, rather than dampening Dominic's resolve, it only strengthened his certainty that Lina was worth whatever opposition they might encounter. "Thank you," he said suddenly. Lina glanced at him questioningly. "For what? For your strength? For not letting men like Barton make you doubt your worth?" A small smile touched her lips. "My grandfather used to say that a person's worth is not determined by the opinions of others, but by the strength of their spirit and the goodness of their actions." "Your grandfather was a wise man," Dominic said. "Yes," Lina agreed. "He would have liked you, I think." It was a simple statement, but it filled Dominic with unexpected warmth. To be accepted by Lina's family, even those who had passed on, felt like a profound honor. They reached the shelter just as the snow began to fall more heavily. Joseph stood in the doorway, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders against the cold. He raised a hand in greeting, his keen eyes taking in their linked hands and serious expressions. "The storm grows stronger," he observed. "You should return quickly, Dominic Rawlins, before the path becomes dangerous." Dominic nodded his agreement. "I'll come tomorrow with your permission to continue our discussions about the spring cattle drive." It was a formal way of asking to visit Lina, respecting the protocols of their courtship. Joseph inclined his head in acknowledgement. "You will be welcome. Perhaps you will stay for the evening meal." The invitation was significant, a sign that Joseph was accepting Dominic not just as a business associate, but as a potential member of the family. Lina squeezed Dominic's hand once before releasing it and moving toward the shelter. At the doorway, she turned back. "Until tomorrow, Dominic Rawlins." "Until tomorrow, Lina Jacy," he replied, the simple exchange carrying the weight of promise. As he made his way back to the ranch house through the thickening snow, Dominic reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just a few months. From that chance encounter on the ridge to this moment, it felt as though he had been walking a path laid out by forces greater than himself. The thought did not trouble him. On the contrary, it filled him with a sense of rightness, of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with Lina beside him, their strength combined against whatever the world might throw at them. As winter deepened, so did Dominic and Lina's connection. Their courtship progressed according to Apache traditions, with Joseph guiding Dominic through the unfamiliar customs. Dominic learned to offer gifts with symbolic meaning: a hand-carved wooden box to represent shelter, a fine wool blanket to represent warmth, a silver bracelet to represent enduring commitment. Lina, in turn, shared more of herself with him. She spoke of her childhood in the mountains to the west, of the grandfather who had taught her to listen to the language of plants, of the husband she had loved and lost to senseless violence. Each revelation was offered carefully, a precious trust extended to him piece by piece. The ranch settled into winter rhythms, the work dictated by weather and necessity. Dominic found himself spending more time with the Jacy family, learning their ways and sharing his own. He taught Thomas and William the finer points of ranch management, knowledge they absorbed eagerly. In return, they showed him hunting techniques passed down through generations of Apache warriors, skills that had kept their people alive through countless harsh winters. January brought a bitter cold snap that tested everyone's endurance. The temperature dropped so low that water froze in buckets inside the barn, and the cattle had to be checked hourly for signs of distress. During one such check in the pre-dawn darkness, Dominic discovered a cow that had wandered away from the herd and given birth prematurely. The calf was alive but barely, its tiny body shivering violently in the snow. Without thinking, Dominic stripped off his coat and wrapped the newborn in it, tucking the small creature inside his shirt against his skin for additional warmth. He led the exhausted mother cow back toward the barn, the calf cradled against his chest, its feeble heartbeat a counterpoint to his own. By the time he reached the ranch house, his fingers and face were numb with cold, but the calf had stopped shivering quite so desperately. Frederick, seeing his son's condition, immediately ordered hot water and blankets while Lucas stoked the fire to blazing. "Get that coat off him," Frederick instructed the ranch hands who had come running at the commotion. "And someone ride to the Jacy camp, get Miss Lina here now." Dominic was only vaguely aware of the activity around him. His focus remained on the calf, which blinked up at him with bewildered dark eyes as they were both wrapped in warm blankets before the fire. He didn't notice Lina's arrival until she knelt beside him, her cool hands checking his face and fingers with professional efficiency. "Foolish man," she murmured, though there was no real reproach in her voice. "To risk frostbite for a calf." "Couldn't leave it," Dominic managed through lips that felt strangely stiff. "Would have died." Lina shook her head, but there was understanding in her eyes. "Hold still. This will sting, but it will save your fingers." She applied a pungent salve to his hands, wrapping them carefully in clean cloths. The sensation was indeed painful, like thousands of needles pricking his skin as circulation returned, but he trusted her skill implicitly. When she had finished with his hands, Lina turned her attention to the calf, examining it with gentle thoroughness. "It is very young," she observed. "Born too soon." "Will it live?" Dominic asked, surprising himself with how much he cared about the answer. Lina stroked the calf's damp head thoughtfully. Perhaps, with care, it will need milk, warmth, and attention. I'll look after it, Dominic said immediately, Lina's lips curved in a small smile. I thought you might say that. She reached into her medicine pouch and withdrew a small packet of dried herbs. Mix this with warm milk. It will help the little one grow strong. For the next week, Dominic dedicated himself to the calf's survival. He named her Estrella Star for the white marking on her forehead, and kept her in a makeshift pen near the kitchen stove where the warmth was constant. Every few hours, day or night, he fed her the special mixture Lina had prescribed, encouraged by her increasingly vigorous appetite. Lina visited daily to check on both patient and caretaker, her professional demeanor softening when she saw Dominic asleep on the floor beside the calf's pen, or patiently coaxing the little animal to stand on wobbly legs. It was during these quiet moments, with no one else present, that their conversations deepened beyond the formal exchanges of courtship. "Why do you care so much for one small calf?" Lina asked him one evening as they watched Estrella attempt a few tentative steps around her pen. "Your father has hundreds of cattle. This one would not have been a great loss." Dominic considered the question seriously. "My mother used to say that how we treat the most vulnerable creatures shows the true measure of our character, that even the smallest life has value." Lina nodded, her expression thoughtful. "My people believe something similar, that all living things are connected in a great circle, and to harm any part of that circle needlessly is to harm ourselves." "What happened to your husband?" Dominic asked suddenly, the question emerging before he could reconsider it. He had wanted to ask for weeks but had hesitated, uncertain if he was ready to hear the answer. Lina's face stilled, and for a moment Dominic thought he had overstepped. But then she began to speak, her voice soft yet steady. "We had been married only 2 summers. Nako was a good man, gentle with me but strong in defense of our people. There was a misunderstanding between some of our young men and a cavalry patrol. Words became threats, threats became actions." She paused, her gaze distant with memory. "Nako tried to make peace. He spoke English well and had traded with white settlers before. He approached the soldiers with his hands raised, speaking words of peace." She fell silent again, and Dominic waited, sensing she needed to tell this story in her own time. "They shot him," she finally continued. "Said later they thought he was reaching for a weapon. He was not. He died in my arms, asking me to remember him with joy, not sorrow." Her eyes met Dominic's, clear and direct. "It has taken me many years to honor that request." The quiet strength with which she related this tragedy humbled Dominic. He reached out, taking her hand in his. "Thank you for telling me," he said simply. Lina's fingers tightened around his. "If we are to walk a path together, you should know what shadows lie behind me." "We all have shadows," Dominic replied. "What matters is that we don't face them alone." It was the closest they had come to openly discussing a future together, beyond the formal structures of their courtship. The moment hung between them, fragile yet full of possibility. Estrella chose that moment to let out a plaintive bleat, breaking the tension. Lina laughed softly, the sound washing away some of the sadness her story had evoked. "She knows it is time for her medicine," she observed, reaching for the mixture she had prepared earlier. As they tended to the calf together, Dominic was struck by how natural it felt to be working alongside Lina, their movements in harmony without need for words. It was a simple moment, unremarkable in many ways, yet it crystallized for him what he had been feeling for months. He loved her. Not with the headlong passion of youth, but with a deeper, steadier emotion built on admiration, respect, and genuine connection. The realization must have shone on his face, because Lina paused in her work, looking at him quizzically. "What is it?" Dominic shook his head, not yet ready to voice the fullness of his feelings. "Just thinking that Estrella is lucky to have you looking after her." Lina's expression suggested she knew there was more to it than that, but she accepted his answer with a nod. "She is lucky to have both of us. Both of us." The simple phrase carried echoes of the future Dominic was beginning to envision one where both of us extended beyond caring for a calf to building a life together. As January gave way to February, signs of an early spring began to appear. The snow receded from the south-facing slopes, revealing tender green shoots beneath. Birds returned from their winter migrations, filling the morning air with song. On the ranch, preparations for spring planting and calving season intensified. Estrella thrived under Dominic and Lina's care, growing from a fragile newborn to a lively calf that followed Dominic around like a puppy whenever he let her out of her pen. Frederick grumbled good-naturedly about having livestock in the house, but made no move to banish the little cow, especially when he saw how attached his son had become to her. The relationship between Dominic and Lina continued to deepen, their courtship progressing through the stages Joseph had outlined. By Apache tradition, the final phase involved Dominic proving he could provide for Lina by bringing a substantial gift to her family, traditionally game from a successful hunt. Dominic took this requirement seriously, consulting with William about the best hunting grounds and techniques. Though he was an experienced hunter, having grown up providing meat for the ranch, he wanted to honor the Apache ways by following their hunting practices as closely as possible. On a clear day in late February, Dominic, along with William and Thomas, set out before dawn for the foothills where deer were known to gather. They moved silently through the awakening landscape, William leading the way with the quiet sureness of a man who could read the land like a book. After several hours of patient tracking, they spotted a fine buck grazing in a small clearing. William motioned for Dominic to take the shot, a gesture of respect that acknowledged this hunt's significance. Dominic steadied his rifle, took careful aim, and fired. The buck dropped cleanly, a shot through the heart ensuring a quick death. As they approached the fallen animal, William showed Dominic how to offer the traditional Apache prayer of thanks for the deer's sacrifice, a ceremony that honored the spirit of the creature that would provide sustenance. They dressed the deer efficiently, preparing the meat for transport back to the ranch. It was a good kill. The buck was large and healthy, with enough meat to feed Lina's family for many days. "This is a worthy gift," William said approvingly as they loaded the prepared meat onto their horses. "My sister will be honored." Dominic felt a surge of pride at the simple statement. He had come to respect William and Thomas deeply over the months of working together, and their acceptance meant almost as much to him as Joseph's. When they returned to the ranch, Joseph was waiting. He inspected the gift solemnly, then nodded his approval. "You have done well, Dominic Rawlins. Tonight we will feast together, and I will speak with the spirits about your union with my daughter." That evening, the Rawlins family joined the Jacys for a celebratory meal at their camp. Maria contributed her famous cornbread, while Frederick brought a case of his best whiskey. The atmosphere was festive yet dignified, a blending of two cultures in celebration of the bond forming between Dominic and Lina. After the meal, Joseph rose to address the gathering. In his hands, he held a blanket intricately woven with symbols that Dominic had learned represented protection, fertility, and enduring love. "Among our people," Joseph began, his voice carrying in the still evening air, "marriage is not just the joining of two individuals, but the joining of families, of histories, of futures." He looked from Dominic to Lina, who sat side by side but not touching, as was proper during this ceremony. Dominic Rawlins has shown himself to be a man of honor, of courage, and of respect. He has followed our ways and proven his worthiness to join with my daughter. Joseph held out the blanket. This wedding blanket has been in our family for 4 generations. It carries the blessings of our ancestors and the hopes of those yet to come. He draped it around both Dominic and Lina's shoulders, physically joining them for the first time in the ceremonial way of Apache tradition. Under this blanket, Joseph continued, you are sheltered together. May your union be strong as the mountains, enduring as the stars, and blessed with many seasons of joy. Frederick then stood, clearly moved by the ceremony despite his usual reserve. In our tradition, he said, producing a small wooden box from his pocket, a token is given to seal the promise of marriage. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small diamond. This was my Elizabeth's ring. She would be proud to know it will be worn by a woman of such strength and dignity. He handed the box to Dominic, who took it with hands that trembled slightly. This was not part of the planned ceremony, and the unexpected gift from his father left him momentarily speechless. Gathering himself, Dominic turned to Lina. Under the ceremonial blanket, they were in their own small world, witnessed but private. Lina Jacy, he said softly, from the moment you came into my life, nothing has been the same. You have shown me what true courage looks like, what it means to live with honor and purpose. I offer you this ring as a symbol of my promise to walk beside you all the days of my life, to honor your traditions as well as my own, and to build a future where both can thrive together. Lina's eyes shone in the firelight as she extended her hand. I accept your promise, Dominic Rawlins, and offer my own in return, to walk beside you through all seasons, to share your joys and sorrows, to honor the path we create together. Dominic slipped the ring onto her finger where it settled as though it had been made for her. Around them, both families watched with approval and, in some cases, misty eyes. By the traditions of the Apache people and the customs of our own, Frederick pronounced, these two are now joined. Let no one put asunder what has been blessed by both worlds. A cheer went up from the gathered families, and the celebration continued late into the night. Dominic and Lina remained close throughout, the wedding blanket draped around their shoulders a visible symbol of their new union. As the festivities wound down, Frederick approached them with a proposition that took both by surprise. I've been thinking, he said, his tone suggesting he'd given the matter considerable thought, that the old line cabin near the western creek would make a fine home for a newly married couple. It needs some work, but the foundation is solid, and the location offers privacy while still being close enough to the main ranch for daily operations. Dominic was stunned by the offer. The line cabin, while currently unused, sat on one of the most beautiful sections of Rawlins land, overlooking a fertile valley with the creek running nearby. It would indeed make an ideal home. That's very generous, Father, he managed. Frederick waved away his thanks. It's practical. You'll need your own place, and that cabin's been sitting empty too long. He glanced at Lina. There's good soil there for a garden, and plenty of the medicinal plants you use grow along the creek. It was clear he had considered their needs carefully, a gesture that spoke volumes about his acceptance of their union. Thank you, Mr. Rawlins, Lina said sincerely. It is a great kindness. Frederick's expression softened. Your family now, Lina, and in this family we look after our own. Over the next few weeks, the line cabin was transformed. Ranch hands helped with the structural repairs, while Lina, Maria, and the women from neighboring ranches who had come to respect the Apache healer worked on making the interior comfortable. Joseph and his sons built a separate structure nearby, that could serve as both a healing room for Lina's practice and additional space for family members who might visit. Throughout this time, Dominic marveled at how seamlessly Lina integrated herself into ranch life while maintaining her own traditions. She moved between worlds with a grace that he admired deeply, adapting without losing herself. It gave him hope that their unusual union might succeed despite the doubts many still expressed. Not all reactions to their marriage had been positive. Elijah Barton had made good on his threat to spread word throughout the county, and there had been consequences. Certain business associates now dealt exclusively with Frederick or Lucas, avoiding Dominic entirely. Some families stopped attending the same church services, and invitations to social events became scarce. Yet for every door that closed, it seemed another opened. Families who had benefited from Lina's healing skills stood firmly by the couple. The Mexican workers from nearby ranches, who had often felt the sting of prejudice themselves, showed their support through small gifts and genuine friendship. And the Apache community, hearing of the respectful way Dominic had honored their traditions, began to view the Double D as a place of safety and fair treatment. By early March, the line cabin was ready for habitation. On the evening before they were to move in, Dominic and Lina walked the property together, planning where they would plant the garden, where additional shelters might be built if Joseph and the boys decided to move closer, how they might expand in the future if children came along. "Are you happy, Lina?" Dominic asked as they stood on the small porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Lina considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Happy is a simple word for a complex feeling," she finally said. "I am content. At peace in a way I have not been for many years. And yes," she added, turning to him with a smile that still had the power to take his breath away, "I am happy to be walking this path with you." Dominic drew her into his arms, still marveling that he had the right to do so. "Even with all the challenges, especially with the challenges," Lina replied, resting her head against his chest. "They show us the strength of what we are building together." As they stood there in the gathering dusk, Dominic reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From that desperate encounter on the ridge to this peaceful evening on the porch of what would be their home, it felt like a lifetime had passed. In many ways, it had the man he had been before meeting Lina seemed a stranger to him now, someone who had yet to understand what truly mattered. "You ever think about that day on the ridge?" he asked. "When I gave you copper to escape," Lina nodded against his chest. "Often. I think about how easy it would have been for you to ride past, to pretend you had not seen what was happening. One small choice that changed everything." "I'm glad I made the right one," Dominic murmured into her hair. Lina tilted her face up to his. "As am I. Though I believe it was not chance that brought you to that ridge at that moment. The spirits guide our steps, even when we do not know where we are going." "Then I'm grateful to the spirits," Dominic said, lowering his head to kiss her gently, "for leading me to you." The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect day for beginning their new life together. As Dominic loaded the last of their belongings onto the wagon, a commotion at the main gate drew everyone's attention. A rider was approaching at a leisurely pace, leading a familiar chestnut horse behind him. "Copper," Dominic exclaimed, recognizing his stallion immediately. The rider, a young Apache man Dominic didn't recognize, reined in near the house. "I bring greetings from the people near Marfa," he announced formally, "and the return of a horse that has served its purpose." Lina stepped forward, speaking rapidly in Apache to the young man, who replied with evident respect. After a brief conversation, she turned to Dominic with a smile. "This is my cousin's son, Michael. He has journeyed from Marfa to return Copper and to bring news from our family there." Dominic approached Copper, who nickered in recognition and nudged his former owner's chest affectionately. "Welcome back, old friend," he said, stroking the horse's gleaming neck. "And thank you for keeping your promise." To Michael, he extended his hand in greeting. "You're welcome at the Double D for as long as you wish to stay. Any family of Lina's is family of mine." The young man accepted the handshake with solemn dignity. "I thank you for your hospitality, Dominic Rawlins. I have heard much about the man who gave his horse to my aunt that she might live." Dominic felt a flush of embarrassment at the way his actions had apparently become something of a legend among Lina's extended family. It was nothing any decent man wouldn't have done. Lina, translating the exchange for her relatives who had gathered to greet the newcomer, smiled at Dominic's modesty. "Yet not every man would have done it," she pointed out. "That is why the story is told." As they welcomed Michael and prepared to continue with moving into the line cabin, now with Copper's unexpected but welcome assistance, Dominic was struck by the sense of rightness that pervaded the moment. The circle that had begun with that desperate encounter on the ridge had come full circle with Copper's return. Later, as they settled into their new home, Lina shared what Michael had told her about Copper's time in Marfa. The stallion had become something of a celebrity among her relatives, treated with special care as the horse that had saved Lina's life. Children had been taught to recite the story of the cowboy who gave his prized horse to an Apache woman in danger, a tale that had taken on elements of legend with each retelling. "They say," Lina related with amusement, "that Copper can find his way anywhere in Texas, that he speaks to the wind, and that he carries messages between our peoples." Dominic laughed, scratching Copper's ears as the horse gazed at them through the open window of the cabin. "Well, he did find his way back to us. Perhaps there's some truth to the legend after all." As night fell on their first day in their new home, Dominic and Lina sat before the fireplace, the wedding blanket wrapped around them against the spring chill. Outside, the sounds of the ranch gradually quieted, replaced by the chorus of night creatures beginning their evening songs. "You remember what you said to me when you returned?" Dominic asked, his arm around Lina's shoulders. She smiled at the memory. "I said many things." "You said, 'I choose you,'" Dominic reminded her. "Not, 'I came to repay a debt,' though that's what you told everyone else. To me, you said, 'I choose you.'" Lina turned in his embrace to face him. "And I meant it. I had many reasons to return honor, gratitude, duty. But in my heart, I knew the truth. I came back because in that moment on the ridge when you gave me Copper without thought of reward, I saw something I had not believed existed any more, a man whose heart was true." Dominic pulled her closer. "I'm glad you chose me, Lina Jacy Rawlins. And I choose you every day for all the days to come." Outside their window, Copper nickered softly, as if adding his approval to their exchange. Inside, the fire burned warm and steady, casting golden light over the beginning of their shared life, a life built on one moment of selfless courage that had changed everything. 5 years passed, seasons turning with the rhythms of ranch life. The Double D prospered under the combined leadership of Frederick, who showed no signs of slowing down despite approaching 70, and his sons. Dominic managed the western portion of the ranch from the line cabin, which had expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. Lina had given birth to twins in the second year of their marriage, a boy they named Frederick Joseph, after both grandfathers, and a girl called Elizabeth Morning Star, honoring both Dominic's mother and Lina's grandmother. The children, now 3 years old, were the light of the ranch, adored by both families and spoiled shamelessly by their Uncle Lucas. The Jacy family had become integral to ranch operations. Joseph served as foreman for the horse breeding program, his expertise transforming the double defies reputation for fine stock. Thomas and William managed their own section of the ranch, implementing innovative grazing techniques that combined Apache wisdom with modern ranching methods. They had both married Thomas to Maria's niece, Lina, and William to a young Apache woman from the Marfa community. Lina's healing practice had expanded beyond the ranch to serve families throughout the county. Her reputation had grown to the point where even those who had initially shunned the Rawlins for the mixed marriage now sought her skills when conventional medicine failed. She had trained several apprentices, including Lucas's wife, Sarah, ensuring the knowledge would continue for future generations. Not all challenges had disappeared with time. There were still those who looked askance at the mixed family, who muttered about going native when they thought no one could hear. But the double defies prosperity spoke louder than any criticism, and Frederick's unwavering support of his son's marriage had silenced many detractors. On a warm spring morning, similar to the one when Lina had first returned to the ranch, Dominic sat on the porch of their home, watching his children play in the yard with their grandfather Joseph. Copper, now semi-retired but still magnificent despite his age, grazed nearby, keeping a watchful eye on the twins as he had since their birth. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Dominic's attention to the path from the main ranch house. Lucas was riding toward them at a brisk pace, his expression suggesting news of some importance. "Dom," he called as he dismounted. "Riders coming in from the south. Father says you should come." "Trouble?" Dominic asked, immediately alert. Despite the relative peace of recent years, the memory of those bounty hunters had never entirely faded. Lucas shook his head. "Don't think so. Apache by the look of them. About a dozen, including women and children. Asked for you and Lina specifically." Dominic called to Joseph, who nodded his understanding and gathered the twins closer as Dominic went to find Lina. She was in her healing room, preparing medicines for a neighboring rancher's wife who was expecting her first child. "Visitors," Dominic told her. "Apache, asking for us by name." Lina wiped her hands on her apron, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps from Marfa. Michael mentioned some families were considering moving north." They rode to the main house together, arriving just as Frederick was welcoming the travelers. The leader of the group, a dignified man in his 40s, stepped forward when he saw Lina and Dominic approach. "I am Daniel White Bear," he introduced himself. "These are my family and friends from the reservation near Marfa. We have heard much of the Rawlins Ranch and the Apache healer who is respected here." Lina dismounted, greeting the visitors in their own language before switching to English for Dominic and Frederick's benefit. "What brings you so far north, Daniel White Bear?" The man's expression grew somber. "Conditions at the reservation worsen. The agent is corrupt, taking for himself what the government sends for our people. Disease spreads in the crowded conditions, and there is not enough food." He straightened his shoulders. "We wish to work to provide for ourselves. We have heard that on Rawlins land, Apache people are treated with respect, that their skills are valued." Frederick stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the travel-worn group. "How many in total are seeking work?" 24, Daniel replied. 12 here, 12 waiting at the creek to know if we are welcome. All can work, the men with cattle or horses, the women with gardens or households, the children with whatever tasks are appropriate for their age." Frederick exchanged a glance with Dominic, a silent communication born of years working side by side. Then he turned back to Daniel. "The Double D has prospered with the help of the Jacy family," he said. We would be foolish to turn away willing workers with valuable skills. He extended his hand to Daniel. There is land on the eastern boundary that has good water and shelter. You may establish your camp there and work with us through the season. If all goes well, more permanent arrangements can be discussed. Relief washed over Daniel's face as he clasped Frederick's hand. Your generosity will not be forgotten, Mr. Rawlins. We will prove our worth to your ranch. As the new arrivals were shown to the eastern pastures where they would set up camp, Lina turned to Dominic with shining eyes. 5 years ago, such an arrangement would have been unthinkable. One man's choice has created ripples that continue to spread. Dominic squeezed her hand. Our choice, he corrected gently. I may have given you copper that day, but you chose to return. Everything that has happened since flows from that decision. Later that evening, as they walked home under a sky ablaze with stars, Dominic and Lina paused to watch Copper and his offspring grazing peacefully in the moonlight. The stallion had sired a line of exceptional horses that were becoming the double Dietikes' most valuable asset. Another unexpected gift from that fateful encounter. I have been thinking, Lina said, leaning against Dominic's side, about what we will tell our children when they are old enough to understand their heritage. Dominic wrapped an arm around her shoulders. About being both Apache and white, about the prejudice they might face, Lina nodded. And about how their parents found each other, about a horse named Copper and a choice that changed everything. We'll tell them the truth, Dominic said simply. That sometimes the right path isn't the easy one, but it's worth taking anyway. That what others think matters less than what you know in your heart to be right. And that sometimes, Lina added softly, giving something away brings the greatest gift of all in return. As if understanding he was being discussed, Copper raised his head and nickered softly in their direction. Dominic laughed, the sound carrying in the still night air. He still thinks he orchestrated the whole thing, he said. Taking you safely to Marfa, then making sure you came back. Lina smiled, her face luminous in the moonlight. Perhaps he did. The spirits work in mysterious ways, often through the most unexpected messengers. Dominic couldn't argue with that. His life had changed the moment he decided to give his horse to a stranger in danger, but the true transformation had come when she returned on foot to say, I choose you. Everything that mattered in his world, now his wife, his children, the community they were building, stemmed from that single, miraculous choice. As they continued toward home, where Joseph would be waiting with the sleeping twins, Dominic silently thanked whatever forces had guided him to that ridge on that particular evening. The path hadn't always been easy, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead, but he had never once regretted the decision that had brought Lina into his life. Under the vast Texas sky, with the woman he loved beside him and the future stretching before them full of possibility, Dominic Rawlins knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. And that, perhaps, was the greatest blessing of all.